So welcome, this is the Brian A. Joyce Report, and today we're going to do something a little bit special. We're going to give an insider's tour of the historic Massachusetts State House. And you're going to get to see perhaps some things that the average visitor to this historic building hasn't seen. One of the true pleasures is when constituents come and visit. We often have school groups come in and learn a little bit about democracy and freedom and how laws are made and how we govern this society in which we live. And also we get to point out the majestic beauty of this great building. So today we're going to give you an insider's tour. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so now we're in the governor's office, and one of the things, each governor has a choice as to whom he would have hang over the mantle, not necessarily an individual. We'd probably all like to hang a few individuals, but whose portrait? And our current governor, Deval Patrick, has chosen a portrait of John Andrew, who served as governor of the Commonwealth from 1861 to 1866. And I think the significance to Deval Patrick of Governor Andrew is that Andrew was the governor during the Civil War. He raised the 54th Regiment, the famous fighting 54th Regiment in the Civil War, to combat slavery, and has a lot of significance for our first African-American governor. There's a lot of symbolism in this room. Up there, I don't know if you can catch that, Mike, the swords of justice is depicted there. This gold star is symbolic of Massachusetts being one of the original 13 colonies and ultimately 13 states. We have over here a symbol of, I believe, justice, and up here the medallion is, of course, the Commonwealth's seal. the governor works here, and sometimes we'll have meetings here on important issues throughout the district. We had a recent powwow here about the Westwood Station and ensuring the minimal impact on the neighborhoods in Canton while working very hard to help grow the regional economy.
Yep.
I remember that photograph. That was taken the day that Deval became governor, and it was with Douglas Wilder, who was the first African-American governor since Reconstruction. He was a governor of Virginia. This photograph is going to have to be changed because that's with Gordon Brown, who was no longer the Prime Minister of Great Britain. And there's something that the President gave the governor to commemorate his inauguration as President of the United States. Okay, so we're standing in the chambers of the Governor's Council, and Governor's Council in Massachusetts is responsible for approving judges that are nominated to the bench by the governor. It's interesting, we're one of only 2 states in the nation that has a Governor's Council. The original Governor's Council had far more responsibilities. Actually predates the American Revolution, predates at least our current Constitution, so a pre-colonial era. And through the years, much of its power and responsibilities have been taken over by others, to the point that in the 1960s, when there was a very high-profile scandal involving bribery and the like, there was a movement by both Democrats and Republicans to abolish the Governor's Council. And in fact, by popular referendum, it was abolished. Now, interestingly, the Constitution from 1780, written by John Adams, had the Governor's Council in it. So when the people voted to abolish the Governor's Council in the 60s, they weren't, I guess, complete enough, didn't change the Constitution, so this body survived. And I have actually introduced legislation to amend the Constitution to abolish what I think is not a necessary appendage of state government, in that, again, I think it's part of what we have to do is deliver core government services better, faster, cheaper, more efficiently. And in the U.S. government and in 48 other states, there is no such executive council. And, you know, just my opinion, I think we could do without it, but there are others that respectfully and sometimes not as respectfully agree. My good friend Bob Jubenville is running for the Governor's Council, a guy from Milton who I think is a very capable person. So it's no reflection on any individual, but I think that role of approving judges could perhaps be best served elsewhere without need for this body, and I think it would be one of the ways we could demonstrably save money and show the people that we're trying to be as cost effective as possible. Mike, we've just run into my friend Jeff Mullen, my law school classmate and neighbor and fellow Little League coach, who is also the Secretary of Transportation. We've done, the legislature and the Patrick administration, taken steps to consolidate the myriad of, I think, 7 different state transportation agencies, and again, in our effort to be more cost effective and efficient, get rid of all those bureaucracies and duplicative services and put it under this guy's very capable leadership. So fortuitous that as we tour the State House, we run into Secretary Mullen.
Well, let me say, this is Milton Television. Let me
It's
say all
going to
the
go throughout the district.
residents of
Folks in Canton
Senator
and
Joyce's
Milton.
district. Let me just say, the Senator's been a great leader in transportation and a good partner of mine and the governor's in moving a transportation agenda, not just on reform, but on projects throughout the district and frankly the Commonwealth, for which I appreciate. He's a good friend and a great leader for all of you. In terms of reform, we're working hard to reform your transportation organization and to prove to all of you that we're proper stewards of the infrastructure, taking down costs, removing back office expenses, and focusing on the 2 stalwart goals of transportation reform, which is improved customer service and a focus on safety. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you, and best of luck in all you do.
And to my friends in Canton, we've been working to
Westwood Station.
I have a rock-solid commitment from the Governor and the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Economic Affairs. We're looking at potentially as much as $30 million in public infrastructure investment in the town of Canton so as to ensure the quality of life is not adversely impacted by this very good opportunity of economic development at Westwood Station.
I'll work out how to get that done.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
So in the governor's waiting area, it's by tradition the portraits of the most recent governors hang. So here we have Governor Frank Sargent, who served from 1969 through 1974. Governor Ed King, who served from 1979 to 1982. Governor Mike Dukakis, who served from 1975 to 78, and then again from 83 to 1990. Governor Dukakis was followed by Governor Weld, who served from 1991 to 1997. He was succeeded by Governor Paul Cellucci. RGO Paul Cellucci served from 1997 to 2001. In acting Governor Jane Swift, there was actually some debate and discussion as to whether her portrait would hang because she never was elected in her own right. She was appointed. The decision was made by the Bureau of State Office Buildings that sure, her portrait would hang. She was the first woman to serve as governor in our state's history. And then the most recent governor, Mitt Romney, served from 2003 to 2007. So here we stand in the House of Representatives, and this wasn't the original House of Representatives as explained in the tour of the Senate. That's where the House used to meet, and in about, I think, 1898, this new House of Representatives was built, and it's just truly a beautiful, majestic room. Honduran cherry, I think, is the wood, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, no, mahogany, I'm sorry, mahogany. But in any event, there's a lot of symbolism. We'll touch upon a couple of important things. This is where President Kennedy gave his very famous City Upon the Hill speech in 1961, just prior to being sworn in as President of the United States. January 9th, 1961, President Kennedy gave his very famous speech to the joint meeting of the House and the Senate. And it's funny, Senator Kennedy, I think, only addressed this body once, and that was fairly recently. That was, within 5 years or so of his passing. But this House chamber now, there are 160 state representatives. Each represents some 40,000 constituents. And when they vote not by the call of the yeas and nays as we do in the Senate, but they vote electronically, so that there is a button on each desk for a yay or a nay, a yes or a no, and each representative's name is listed on those essentially electronic scoreboards. And if a green light goes up next to a representative's name, it means yes, and if a red light goes up next to a representative's name, it means no. When the House is in session, there are public viewing galleries where the general public can come in and watch the debate. That's in the back. This balcony here is reserved for the press. The press room is just off that balcony, although I think many members of the press actually just watch it on the closed circuit television. This balcony up here is the reserved for special guests of the Speaker of the House. And when the Senate and the House meet in joint session, constitutional conventions, for example, this is where we'll meet. And the Senate will enter in through that center door and will be announced by the Sergeant at Arms. Similarly, when the governor comes into the chamber to give his State of the State address once a year, he'll enter through that center door. The Sergeant of Arms will introduce him, and he'll give his address to a joint session of House and Senate members. One year, I'll tell you a little confession, one year I snuck my son Mikey in. He marched right in the middle. He was about 18 years old at the time, or 19 maybe, marched right in the middle of all the senators, and everybody cheered him as if he was one of the senators. And the Governor, Deval Patrick, who's our next door neighbor, came over afterwards and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" He thought I got a big kick out of it. But in any event, so this is where the House members meet and debate the issues of the day. The Speaker's rostrum is normally presided over by the Speaker of the House, Bob DeLeo. When there is a joint session, the Senate President will preside, Therese Murray. And I have some extraordinary memories here. I was only served in the House for 1 year, and in fact, I was sworn in on January 1st, 1997 as a state representative. And it turned out, I found out later, that 101 years earlier to the day, my great-grandfather on my mother's side, Jeremiah F. Donovan, had been elected to this chamber from Cambridge. And I always thought I got this love of politics from my dad, but I guess I got some of it from my mother's side as well. And I remember getting sworn in and having all these babies in my arms, and it was just a magic moment. And as 9 months later, the state senator announced he's stepping down. And I had not yet given my maiden speech. And I was afraid then to give my maiden speech because I didn't want to call attention to the fact that I was so green in the job and running for the Senate, so I just stayed put. But I remember some extraordinary speeches in here. I remember when Tom Finneran gave a speech past midnight, one of the best I've ever heard, on the death penalty, when that came down to one vote. And that was in the heat of my campaign for the Senate, and that beautiful little boy, Jeffrey Curley, had been murdered. It was a very high-tension time, very emotional speech, and it was one of the best I've heard. I remember Representative Byron Rushing giving a speech here at the rostrum during the debate on same-sex marriage. And during that debate, it was a constitutional convention. We had the senators and the reps here. The galleries were packed. There were, the corridors were packed. Worldwide audience really watching us. This was a historic moment. And I remember giving a speech myself that we were 17 hours into the debate, and there was an effort to do something that I thought was perhaps not appropriate, and I engaged in a filibuster. And I remember the emotions so extraordinary that people were screaming, the representative from Chelsea. And we ended up having to take a break, and subsequently, I had the state police visit my office, the head of the state police and a couple of his senior officers, to indicate that a threat on my life was credible, and that they had identified where I lived, what kind of car Mary drove, and what time she left the house. And I mean, it was just a crazy, crazy period. The emotions were extraordinary. And I remember my dad saying, you know, 5, 6, 7 years later, people would say, what was the big deal? And, you know, like a lot of things, it turns out he was right. But there have been some truly historic moments here in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. During the 50s, the speaker was Christian Herter, who later became governor and later served in the, I think, the Nixon administration, if I'm not mistaken. His father was an artist, and his father actually did these portraits, which depict I think they call it the roads to freedom, the road to freedom in Massachusetts. And you'll see that we have some serious storm damage, which in the last couple of years destroyed one of those paintings. And I think with other priorities, with the extraordinary fiscal challenges we've faced, there's been a reluctance, frankly, on the part of the elected officials to, they have stopped the leaking, but to repair that artwork is just not thought to be a priority at this time. I sure hope that they do restore some beautiful art to this historic chamber. So you have, this is a depiction of the Salem witch trials. Then you have John Hancock proposing an addition of the Bill of Rights to the Constitution. Here we have John Adams and Samuel Adams and James Bowdoin drafting the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780, one of the oldest constitutions in the world. And here we have you know, it's funny, the revolt against autocratic Governor Andros in 1689. I think the last royal governor was Hutchinson, who departed for Boston from the Neponset River in Milton. And now we have a governor from Milton again. Up here, by the way, and the names depicted are some of the great minds of that time, and some of the great historic minds in science and medicine and literature, and you'll recognize many of those names. Longfellow, Lowell, Whittier, Copley, Hunt, Edwards, Channing, Brooks, Harper, Bradford, Endicott, Winfrey, etc.
The fish. The fish.
Oh, yes, there is a fish that hangs.
Yeah, you just don't want to be in it.
That's the fish.
There is a fish that hangs from the balcony that is referred to as the sacred cod. And it was given to the representatives back in the 1700s so that they would never forget the importance of the fishing industry to Massachusetts. And in the 1930s, a couple of pranksters from the Harvard Lampoon stole that fish. It was called the Great Codnapping. And the House of Representatives at that time refused to meet until the codnapping was solved, and indeed it was. So here we are in the historic Massachusetts Senate chamber. And this is the, I think, most historic part of the most historic building in Massachusetts. The State House was built on land formerly owned by our first governor, John Hancock. And The architect was Charles Bulfinch, the same architect who designed the U.S. Capitol building. So if you are anywhere in the state and you see a sign that says, oh, I don't know, 15 miles to Boston, that is actually measured from the very center of this room. We're standing beneath the Golden Dome, which was originally copper, done in the shop of Paul Revere out in Canton. But we're right beneath the Golden Dome, and so right in the center of that room is thought of as the geographic center of Boston. The acoustics in this room are extraordinary, so that a person standing on one end of the chamber could easily hear a conversation from another, from across the room. Here we have 39 desks. There are 40 state senators. And I forget the exact way it's described. I think we're the oldest continuously serving Democratic legislative body in the Western Hemisphere. We may be second to one of the houses of Parliament, but I don't think so, in that the Senate has always been 40 members, and the other legislative bodies have changed. For example, the House of Representatives at one point here in Massachusetts had over 700 members when the state of Maine was actually part of Massachusetts then. So there's 40 of us. This was the original House chamber. The Senate was across the hall, and when the House moved down to their new chamber in the 1790s, the Senate took this historic room over. And it is quite historic, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. First, we have a number of statues of busts of prominent folks. So, Mike, if you can get that, we're going to go around. This is of Charles Sumner. Charles Sumner was a United States senator who served Massachusetts at the time preceding the Civil War. And leading up to the Civil War, the great debate on slavery was quite heated. He was seated at his desk in the U.S. Senate chamber, and a congressman from South Carolina came over and attacked him with a cane. Senator Sumner's feet got tangled up in his desk. He was not able to rise and defend himself, and he was beaten nearly to death. It took him several years to recover. He never fully recovered. But that desk today from the U.S. Senate that Charles Sumner's feet got tangled in and resulted in his not being able to adequately defend himself is at the Stoughton Historical Commission, right in the center of Stoughton. Over here we have the likeness of George Washington, our first president. Now it's interesting that 200 plus years ago there was no mass media. There was no way to see a person's picture through the television, the newspaper, etc. So for many years, that was thought to be John Adams. I guess with the powdered wigs, they all looked alike or something. And it was in 1825 when Lafayette, who's the only foreign-born dignitary whose likeness is depicted here at the State House, came to visit. When he was laying the cornerstone for the Bunker Hill Monument, he said, no, that was George Washington. And the way he identified him was his facial expression. The father of our country, had wooden teeth. Over here, I don't know if you can get it, Mike, on the other side of the rostrum is Abraham Lincoln. Next is Henry Wilson, who came from Natick. He was a vice president of the United States under Ulysses S. Grant. Next is Ben Franklin. People forget he was from Massachusetts. In fact, his parents are buried right out here on Tremont Street. Next is Colonel Tufts, after whom Tufts University is named. Next is Samuel Francis Smith, who was a Protestant minister from Newton. He wrote the song, "My Country 'Tis of Thee." So I'll tell you a couple of other symbolic things. We actually just interrupted the court officers who were adding to what's called the orders of the day. So there are two things on each desk. This is actually my desk, and you'll see that the chairs are at different levels. That's because at the beginning of every session, every 2-year session, the court officers adjust the heights of the desks so that we all see eye to eye. There's a sense in the House of Representatives that it's much more top-down. Here, we're all equals, and we elect essentially our class president or our president of the Senate. Now it's the first woman in our history, Therese Murray, to be first among equals. But each senator, the rules are different in the Senate than in the House. Each senator has significant authority, and that's symbolically depicted by adjusting the heights. I happen to sit next to a very, very tall fellow, so you see his chair is a lot lower than mine. But anyhow, also here in the Senate, we have the orders of the day, which is on the right side of the desk. And the orders of the day shows what matters are coming before the Senate on a particular day. And those matters, the actual bills, are over there on the table. And that's the genesis of the term, that something is on the table for discussion. Literally, those are the items that are on the table. And you'll see that it's tied together with red ribbon. I think it used to be red tape. And you've heard the expression cutting through red tape. That's where that comes from. Here is, on this side, is the Journal of the Senate, and that's the record of those items we've taken up this session. As I said, the presiding officer will sit up there. Typically, it's the Senate President, Therese Murray. Here we'll have the clerks that keep order. They have laptop computers going. There's a lot of items coming through quickly. And the first time you watch, it's somewhat hard to follow. Over time, you learn the particular rhythms and movements and how things get done. I almost liken it a little bit like a racquetball player who, as he or she, or a tennis player, after a few years, you take, a couple of less moves or a couple of less steps because you know where the ball's going to go. So after a while, you understand the rhythm and movements in here. This is where the lawyers sit, Senate counsel, to make sure that everything is done properly and legally, etc. There were a couple of statutes over here that I hadn't shown you. This one, as I mentioned, the only foreign-born dignitary, Marquis de Lafayette, who came back here in 1825, and really at the beginning of his triumphant tour of 1826, when he toured the United States, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The next one is George Boutwell, who was a diplomat, came from Dorchester, the Boutwell Street in Dorchester. What's interesting up here, this firearm was used by Captain John Parker at the Battle of Lexington, April of 1775. That was his actual weapon. And if you're able to, Mike, if you can scan over here to the weapon that hangs on this side, that was the first British firearm that was captured. And you can tell the British had far superior weaponry. Really amazing that this group of farmers was able to defeat the most powerful nation on earth at the time. This is the main entrance to the State House. And when a governor leaves office, by tradition, he or she takes the long walk out of office, and the gates will open up. And when our current governor was sworn in, this is where he had his inauguration, his swearing-in ceremony. But other than for heads of foreign nations and for the governor's long walk, that entrance is typically not used. So if we get down here, this end of the balcony, here we're back to the governor's office where we have visited. There's a statute that just went up in the past 10 or 15 years of President Kennedy. Again, he never served here, but certainly a native son of Massachusetts. That side is really the executive branch. That's the, 3 branches of government. That's that branch of government that falls under the governor. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this tour of the Massachusetts State House. It's funny, I think back to the turn of the millennium when you know, we didn't know where to go when it became a new millennium. We wanted to be someplace special, and so Mary and our 5 children and I, we came in here. We actually went up 1 level to the very top of the State House, and we have this great photograph of the kids in their hockey jackets with the fireworks going off in the background. One of my favorite photos. It was taken by a state police officer we handed the camera to, and it just showed the great city of Boston behind us. It's truly a majestic vantage point, and it's interesting to see the John Hancock building, for example, over here, both the old John Hancock and the new John Hancock. As I said, the State House sits on land that was owned by the first governor of Massachusetts, John Hancock. But it's never a dull moment here. We'll often have groups out here protesting, and you know, there was one time during the debate on the recent budget, last year's budget, there was actually a group out there advocating for higher taxes, and I said, my gosh, that's not what I'm hearing out in my district. And so, you know, I do try to spend as much time as I can outside of here, in the district, in the towns and the communities that I represent, the neighborhoods I represent, so that we don't lose touch here, because you know, you just don't want that to happen. Nevertheless, I'm very mindful of the distinct honor and pleasure of serving in this historic building, working for you at the State House. I appreciate the opportunity. I hope you've enjoyed this tour, and give us some feedback. It's bjoyce at senate.state.ma.us, and my telephone number in the office, 617-722-1643. At home, 617-696-0200. Thanks for joining me today.